All right, now we are recording. So this is the third and final of the Shabbat class series. The first one we focused on keeping Shabbat in outer space, but really what does that mean for us and how Shabbat is meaningful to us in our time. Last week, I guess the second one, not last week, but the second one was about Shamor and Zachor et Shabbat, remembering Shabbat, but it doesn't just mean obviously having a post-it note and just remembering that Shabbat is there, but really bringing it into who we are and how we experience Shabbat in a more meaningful and elevated way. The third, today's class, I wanted to focus on the 39 Melachot of Shabbat. We're used to thinking of Shabbat as all of these restrictions, and we are not allowed to do malacha. We cannot do work and labor on Shabbat. So when we typically think of work, it usually means employment, toil, modern technology. So if you stop all those three things, let's say you stop working and you stop doing certain physical labors and you stop with cell phones and computers, you're not actually still keeping Shabbat just because you stopped those three things, right? There's something that's a much different experience. You've taken a break. That's a good vacation. I recommend it for everyone, but that's not actually Shabbat. One of the best examples of this is that one of the actual malachot listed in the Torah is hotza'ah, which is taking something outside of your reshut hayachid, your individual space, which is why we have an eruv, so that we're able to carry. Now, if someone's holding a pen, well, they're not supposed to hold a pen. If someone is holding a book and they walk outside the eruv, they're not in their employment, they're not toiling, they're not doing modern technology, but they are now violating one of the melachot of Shabbat, one of the laws of forbidden work on Shabbat. So it obviously doesn't mean work. It doesn't mean labor. That's the best translation we have are labors or activities. But that's what we're going to explore today, the meaning behind the 39 malachot, and specifically, what is this 39? I'm trying to think which way to go, because I'm looking at the time. We are told, according to the oral tradition, just according to what was when we were given the Torah at Har Sinai, that there are 39 malachot. How did we get to 39? It's in the Gemara in Shabbat 70 daf A, the first daf, that it says we have 39 malachot, and it breaks it down by showing us the pasuk of the Eila, that these are the Eila hadvarim. These are the things that you're no longer allowed to do. And they say the gematria of that is 36, plus it has the 3 times as it uses the word malacha. So then you get to the number 39. Okay, that's the oral Torah. That's the tradition that were brought down. I'll just show. I'll show you the source in a little bit. How do we know what the 39 malachot actually are? What are the list of them? So knowing them again is also oral Torah. We now find it in the Mishnah and the Gemara. It just says malacha 12 times in the Pshat. It doesn't say what it actually is. Only 4 of them are specifically listed. As I mentioned before, hotza'ah, taking things out from the eruv. So again, those 39 are just somewhere in the oral Torah. We actually have a Mishnah in Chagiga that tries to explain when we think of the malachot of Shabbat. It says that halachot Shabbat harehem kehararim hatilyom b'sa'ara. The halachot of Shabbat are like mountains suspended by a hair. Shehein mikra mu'at v'halachot merubot. As they have little Torah, the Kra. There's very, very little text on them, but there's so many halachot to learn. So if you think about just a mountain stranded by a hair, that's the concept, that's the vision that we have of learning Halachot Shabbat. It's just a lot. Where do we get this? Where do the 39 malachot come from? So that's what we're going to explore today. In Parshat Mishpatim, we got the Shabbat laws and the instructions for constructing the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and all of the tools that go in and the big day kahuna. And then it talks about the Hilchot Shabbat, and you have to keep Shabbat. And then it kind of goes back to, and we're going to entrust Bezalel with building the Mishkan, and Shabbat Tishmoru, you have to guard your Shabbat. So it's a very famous Rashi, which I'm going to share screen with you. Hold on one second. That juxtaposes these two. Here we go. Over here. So the connection of Mishkan to Shabbat. So when it says Sheshet Yamim Ta'avo, that you should work 6 days and then you should observe Shabbat, Rashi says there, the Shabbat prohibition is mentioned before the command about the building of the tabernacle in order to intimate that it does not set aside or supersede the Sabbath. The point of having the two areas, you could just say they were just giving out halachot. Here's the halachot about the Mishkan, here's the halachot about Shabbat. And Rashi's saying it was very intentional that they were building the Mishkan all 6 days, but when Shabbat came, they had to stop. It was kind of instructional. That's the connection. And then the oral Torah built off of that and saying all of the labors of the Mishkan, I'm going to stop share here, all of the labors that we used to build the Mishkan are the labors that we're not allowed to use on Shabbat. So they dyed the parochet on Shabbat, therefore we're not allowed to dye things, D-Y-E, therefore we're not allowed to dye things on Shabbat. We can't build, we're literally building things and putting things together, therefore we can't build on Shabbat. So those are the 39 types of labors we used to build the Mishkan, we're not allowed to use on Shabbat. So what I'm going to hand over to you today to do in your chavrutot, and if this is, I'm sorry if this is if anyone here is their first time, the way that we're doing this is just giving you the intro of what we're doing. For about 20 minutes, we're going to be doing chavruta. If you are not available to chavruta, that's totally fine. We can switch people into different rooms with guided source sheet, and then we'll come back together for a class. So in the chavruta, what you're going to be looking at is there are different opinions as to when the commandment of the Mishkan was given. It's a pretty famous debate. So you'll get to see those primary sources of when was the commandment of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, given in context of the Egel HaZahav, in context of the Jewish people sinning an incredibly great sin, where like Hashem takes them out of Mitzrayim. Hashem is ready to give them the luchot, and they're like, we're not ready. But okay. So I do have one person who's not going to be available for chavruta, but again, if anyone's not available for chavruta, sign back on or stay on in 20 minutes, and because we're going to be summing up the class. So the Egel HaZahav, was it before the Mishkan? Was it after the Mishkan? And what does that mean, and how will that relate to Shabbat? I think it will actually have we'll have two very interesting views of Shabbat and how it actually can affect our experience of Shabbat. So the source sheet I'm going to send to the chat, and then I will assign random, where's chat? I will assign random classes. Oh, I'll stop recording for now. All right, welcome back everyone from your chavrutot. So I want to do a little overview and hear what you all discussed together. So I gave you the context of this conversation, that what the parshiot lay out. So then we have in Parshat Truma, Hashem commanded the Jewish people regarding the Mishkan to build the Mishkan, to have the vessels. Parshat Tetzaveh, Hashem commands them to do the big day kahuna. Parshat Kitisa is the Chet HaEgel, big story of the golden calf. Afterwards is Parshat Vayakel, which also is very timely. It's this week. Vayakel Pekudei is this week. So Parshat Vayakel is the Torah's description of the construction of the Mishkan, and then Parshat Pekudei is the description of the manufacturing of the big day kahuna. So we have the Egel HaZahav smack in the middle of these two, the two times that they're commanding about the Mishkan. So Rashi and Ramban have two very different views as to when the commandment of the Mishkan happened and the Egel happened, and then what that means. So would anyone like to share Rashi's view and what significance they thought that might mean?
Can I go?
Go for it. I don't know if someone else was talking. I didn't see anyone else.
Rashi seemed to view the Mishkan as being reparative, as being like designed for the purpose of atoning for the Chet HaEgel, and in general for atoning for sin.
So that the Parshiot are actually out of order.
Right.
That the Torah lines it up in a specific way, but it's not actually the chronological order of the Torah.
That we had Chet HaEgel, then Moshe goes back up to the mountain, and he says, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to design this. You're going to manufacture these clothing. You're going to come down. You're going to do it.
Yeah.
They do it. And it's there to atone. Right.
So he believes in the premise that's called Ein Mukdam Mu'uchar B'Torah, that there's no chronological order to the Torah. The Torah is not a history book. It's a book of our morals and beliefs, and so therefore things might be out of order because they're trying to impart a message. Okay, so that's Rashi. Ramban. Do we have a Ramban volunteer? What was Ramban's theory as to when Chet HaEgel happened and what that means?
Ramban feels that the Mishkan was always intended, and sort of paraphrasing what I think he's saying here from some things that I've heard in the past, is that it was a way to sort of continually recreate the experience of Sinai,
yes,
which would be among the Jewish people forever. Okay, the idea of the smoke on the mountain, the incense creating the smoke in the tabernacle was supposed to be a similar kind of experience that would really create and retain that memory of that experience.
And it's not just it's not just literally retain the memory, but retain the presence of Hashem. That's what there was. I bolded one line. It says V'hinehem kedoshim re'uyim sheyem bahem mikdash, that they're worthy to have a sanctuary among them, lahashrot shchinato beinehem, to have the shchina of Hashem resting amongst them. V'lachem tzivat tchila al devar hamishkan, and therefore God commanded the Mishkan. So it's not just retaining the memory of Har Sinai, but it's literally kind of bringing Har Sinai into who they are as a people. It's a continued service. Exactly. It's a beautiful, beautiful summary of it. So did anyone get to that last question? So if we have these two opposing ideas of Rashi saying it's reparative and Ramban saying it's lichatchila, it's I never know the great translation for lichatchila. It's the most ideal because we're just bringing Hashem's presence. So if we learn the 39 Melachot of Shabbat from the Mishkan, then how does that change our understanding of the 39 Melachot, if you think according to Rashi or according to the Ramban? If we're thinking according to Rashi, we're saying it's b'di'evad, it's just reparative. Then what does that mean that our 39 Melachot are based off of that versus the Ramban, which is this is bringing Hashem's Shechina into the world?
Well,
go ahead, Lee.
The question is that if Rashi feels, well, let's say that Chet HaEgel didn't occur, what would the Melachot have been for Shabbat have been based on?
That's an excellent. So that's an excellent practical question.
Right. So
it means that Shabbat would have been different.
I had an idea as we were exiting back into the group that when one sins, one views themselves as being godlike, right? There is no one above me, right? I am master of my destiny. And the repair for that is to refrain from being a creator. Right. So Shabbat is saying, no, hold back. You're not the creator of the world.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Right. So Shabbat is kind of fits in with Rashi's view if Shabbat and the Mishkan are these parallels, we refrain from creative activity on Shabbat as a reminder that no, you're not
I
God.
love that.
And it fixes our tendency to think of ourselves as godlike during the week.
Mhm.
Because there are a lot of parallels between the description of the creation of the world by God and the creation of the Mishkan. And the word malacha is used in God's creation of the world too. So I think that fits in with that too.
Beautifully. So I would also say, Stephen, and that maybe it's and Lee, that maybe this answers your question, that it was almost inevitable that the Jewish people were going to sin because we're human. We're not angels. We are a flawed people, and God is almost building into the system, maybe, that you sin, but there's something called teshuvah. So when you had the Egel HaZahav, there's going to be a fix for that. There's going to be the Mishkan. This is how we're going to repair as a Jewish people. But going forward, Jews as individuals might have that time, have relapse, have some kind of sin, have some kind of thing that they might be violating. But every week we have Shabbat to stop. And as you said, to kind of have that ego check that we are not the creator. We cannot do malacha. We cannot do malachet machshevet, creative work.
And I was I just
interesting.
was
Yeah.
thinking that Shabbat is not normally thought of as, for forgiveness, but Yom Kippur,
Yeah.
Shabbat, Shabbaton, don't they? If you had or whatever the phrase is,
Yeah,
the ultimate
beautiful.
Shabbat. So that is seen as for forgiveness.
Yeah.
And the numerical symbolism of 39 being, right, 40 is this idea of complete change.
Complete, whole, yeah.
Whole complete change, right? 40 days and 40 nights of rain transformed the world. 40 years in the desert transformed us from slaves to free people. 40 units of water in the mikveh transforms one from ritually pure, impure to pure.
Yeah.
Right. So 40 is this idea of complete change. 39, right? The reason someone who gets lashes only gets 39 lashes is because no person is so completely evil that they require the full 40 lashes.
Right.
Right. And I think the same thing, 39 Melachot, no person has gotten so far astray that they really see themselves as God. So you really only need 39 Melachot to set you
Not
straight.
40. Interesting. Yeah. I love that. I love that idea. So Rashi is this fascinating idea that even though it's, let's say, b'di'evet, maybe that's okay. Maybe we're supposed to bring that into our Shabbat. Shabbat's not b'di'evet, but it's reflecting us as human beings. Interesting. Ramban seeing the Mishkan as something that's lechatchila, that's there from the beginning, that is Har Sinai. How does that then, if that's how does his view of the Mishkan reflect in the halachot of Shabbat, the 39 malachot of Shabbat, compared to Rashi?
Lee, I think you're muted. Were you trying to say something?
So the two views, as we can see, those two views can feel very different about Shabbat. So I want to pause and look at that last set of in Vayikra, that it says, the pasuk says, "Et Shabtotai tishmeru," you should guard my Shabbat. And last time we talked a little bit about what that means to guard. Umikdeshai tiru et ani Hashem, and you should venerate my sanctuary. I am Hashem. So it's one pasuk where it just says, keep my Shabbos and revere, venerate, fear in a positive way, however you want to translate that word, my sanctuary, I am Hashem. So we have this one pasuk that's just these two areas put together. We saw in the Parshiot, it's interchanged, the Mishkan and Shabbat, Mishkan and Shabbat, and in Vayikra, we just have this one random pasuk that puts the two together. What's the connection? Again, Rashi comes in and says, Et Shabtotai tishmeru, Ein binyan hamikdash docha Shabbat. The building of the mikdash does not push off Shabbat. So most of the articles and commentaries that look at this debate of Rashi and Ramban, and I would say actually most commentators do agree with Rashi. Ibn Ezra, Sforno, they're based on the Midrash Tanchuma. There's other Midrashim. Most of them actually agree with are in the Rashi camp. But when they look at this debate and you see articles about this debate of when was the Mishkan constructed around the Egel HaZahav, a lot of it talks about, Shabbos is so holy that even building a Mishkan, you still have to stop. Maybe you would think the Mishkan is so holy that you can keep going. The Beit HaMikdash, they would bring certain carbonot and would be Mechalel Shabbat because that's what you had to do. Mishkan, no, you really do have to stop. But I think it really is actually a more meta message here. It's not just physically you have to stop Shabbat, but that maybe the emphasis of the 39 Melachot being rooted in the Mishkan is an ultimate reminder that Hashem and Judaism isn't in buildings and isn't in things. When they're building, remember, what was the actual sin that they did? It was the Egel HaZahav, right? It was a thing, it was an object. And Hashem said, I'm going to give you the Mishkan for my Shekhinah to rest. And that's where you're going to come visit me. And when you need to talk to me, I'm going to be in the Mishkan. But then it's not that that's the most important thing. It's really about stopping for a Shabbat, because it's this reminder that Hashem, yes, Hashem's Shekhinah was resting in the Mishkan, but Hashem is wherever you daven. Hashem is wherever you perform a mitzvah. Hashem is wherever you need to connect with Him. That is where Hashem is. That is where your experience of Hashem, of Judaism is. Heschel, Rabbi Abram Joshua Heschel, wrote a beautiful book. It's very, very thin, called The Sabbath, and it's very poetic. It's very short. If anyone wants to read it, I'm sure there's copies in the shul and around. But he has this beautiful chapter about how Shabbat are the cathedrals of time. And he said the Sabbaths are our great cathedrals and our holy of holies. And that Shabbos is a sanctuary in time, a cathedral in time. So while the Mishkan and the Mikdash is a kadosh space to encounter Hashem, it's dafka showing us when it says you stop building the Mishkan to build to observe Shabbat, that every Jew can access Hashem wherever they are, whoever they are, and with whatever tools they have. So which is even more significant now that we don't have a Mishkan, we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. And they're not saying your shuls are the holiest places. It's important to be a part of a community. It's important to go to shul. But your relationship with Hashem exists within you and within your ability to reach out to Hashem. Rav Lichtenstein had a similar idea. He took it in a different direction. He said that the Torah forbids malacha on Shabbat in Parshat Yitro and Mishpatim, but it doesn't actually cite the punishments of karet being that your soul gets cut off, and skila of stoning for violating Shabbat later on until Parshat Kitisa. And in Parshat Kitisa, Shabbat is referred to as an oath, like a sign, and a brit, a covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people. It's like, why aren't these things mentioned before? You'd think if you violate Shabbat, we should learn about that way before. The fact that it's a covenant between the Jewish people and Hashem, you should learn about that way before. So as we saw, the Parsha of Kitisa introduces the idea of Hashrat Hashchina, that the divine presence is going to be amongst the people in the context of building the Mishkan. But as we just said, we stop for Shabbat because Hashem wants us to learn that the Hashrat Hashchina, the Shechina doesn't just rest in space, it does rest in the realm of Shabbat, in time, which would answer the question of why did we push off telling us about the punishments? Why did we push off telling us that it's an oath and a covenant? Because one who violates Shabbat, one who is Machalal Shabbat, it's not just a prohibition, but it's telling us because it's a degradation of Kedushat Hayom of Shabbat. When someone violates Shabbat, we're not saying, oh, you just didn't listen to the laws. We're saying Hashem's Shekhinah is resting in this time and this place. And that's the, I don't want to say crime. That's the negative thing that we're now encountering. It's not that there's a list and we weren't following the list, but it's saying there is this Shekhinah here. There is this cathedral in time. And when we don't follow the halachot of Shabbat, then we are kind of chipping away at that Shekhinah. We're chipping away at that beautiful bubble that we're trying to exist in. So it gives us this much more different context of we are in control of our relationship with Hashem. We are in control of creating that Kodesh, of creating that our own sanctuary in time. And even though we no longer have the Mishkan today, we are supposed to create our Shabbat as a cathedral in time, as a holy space in time. I think either way you view it, whether it's the Rashi view or the Ramban view fits in perfectly, because the Ramban view is saying the Mishkan is this place, is bringing Har Sinai into our life, and that's what Shabbat does. Shabbat is bringing that experience of Hashem coming to meet us into our lives every single week, every seventh day, which is amazing. And if you look at it from the Rashi view, it's Rashi's, the Rashi view, it's also Hashem pointing out that you have this space, you have this holy space that my Shekhinah is resting, but still on Shabbat, it stops because I exist beyond space. I exist beyond things. I exist in you. I exist in every Jew, and I exist in your experience of Shabbat. So if we kind of link actually all three classes together, we now have, when we approach Shabbat, how do we make it a sanctuary in time? So that goes a little bit back to the class on Zachor, on what does it mean to build a relationship with Hashem? What does it mean to remember? We are remembering what we love about Judaism, remembering what our relationship is with God. And if we go back to the first class about space, we talked about the fact that Shabbat is this space that we encounter as a community, and as that was created before mankind, and that we kind of step into that space, and it's holy, and we just have to access that holiness. I think that Shabbat definitely comes every week, but it's certainly, as I have said throughout this whole series, I appreciate teaching this class because it actually does take certain steps to making that space something that's not just rest, something that's not just stopping, but something that's actually holy, something that's actually doing and more thoughtful and more meaningful. I think in the same way that in Lecha Dodi, we talk about Shabbat and the Jewish people as a bride and a groom, and that it's Shabbat is the marriage of the two. So just like in marriages, it takes work. It takes good communication to make marriages work. It's the same thing with Hashem and our Yahadut and our love of Torah. It takes those steps to make it meaningful and to make it holy, to engage. And that's certainly something that I've felt as I've been learning my own materials to teach this, that we have to put in the time, but then our Shabbat will be so much holier, so much more meaningful and elevated, and not just a stopping point and not just a point of vacation or a day off. It can really be an elevated and inspirational, meaningful space. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining me on this
Thank you, Ruthie.
journey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
been a lot
Have
of
a great
fun.
Great.
Have a great Shabbat.
It's not too early.